Hi, I'm Joe,
And I'm Dave.
and we're the hosts of the Chasing Tomorrow podcast, where we bring you stories that delve into the science and spirit behind intriguing people doing extraordinary things.
Welcome to the Chasing Tomorrow podcast. This week it's episode 27. Back in 2007, I watched a movie. Now, keep in mind, I was an ultra runner only for about 2, 3, 4 years at that time, and I was getting into the ultra running scene, and I loved it. And I was godsmacked by this movie called Running the Sahara. Now, there was a character in this movie named Ray Zahab, and he ended up running for 111 days. That was 4,300 miles across the Sahara Desert. And it struck me as being something that was completely impossible. But yet, here's a Canadian ultramarathoner, an extreme athlete, doing that. That spurred me on because I thought, well, hey, what's possible for me? And I've been running ever since. And my my co-host Joe as well too has been doing the very same thing, inspired by people like Ray. Now, Ray, ever since, has gone on countless expeditions. He's been across the South Pole, Siberia, the Atacama Desert, to name a few. But basically, he's going on these massive expeditions, one every 8, 9, 10 months for the last many, many years. I can't wait to talk to him. And we got him on the other line today. We're super, super stoked to bring Ray Zahab to the call. And thanks for being here, Ray.
Hey, thanks, guys. It's an honor to be here among both of you. And Dave, I had no idea you saw Running the Sahara. That's I just learned something.
Fan.
That's amazing. That's
Oh,
fantastic. Because I'm a fan.
Impossible.
So hey,
I can't even imagine I get to meet a guy that I watched in that movie, because I can remember that. I think I watched it 3 times. It was really actually well done. I mean, in addition to these adventure movies, right, sometimes can be boring, but you guys, the director, producer, whoever really put it together. First, of course, the adventure is great, but the story was so well told. But
we were lucky. There was another movie, a big running movie. I don't know if you guys remember this. It's actually my favorite running movie. It's called Running on the Sun. And it's a film that was made about Badwater ultramarathon before, with all the old schoolers, with Marshall Ulrich and Lisa Smith, and before it was cool, right? And what I liked about that film is there was a purity about it. The characters that were doing the things that they were doing were not there for 4,000 Instagram likes on a photo. Right. They were there in the middle of Death Valley running on this race, on the road, for something very personal. And when Running the Sahara, when we did that expedition, which followed a brief ultra running racing career that I had, when we set out across the Sahara, we had no idea that anyone would care. We thought, the concept of this expedition coming together as part of a film project was that it would be leveraged to raise awareness for water issues in North Africa. And so I had no experience with cameras or with film or anything. So I was like, okay, well, this sounds amazing, right? Obviously I knew who Matt Damon was, but the rest of it didn't really sort of sink in. And then when we got across the Sahara, I can remember being in Cairo. I don't know if I've ever told this story before. Being in Cairo and the call going out that we had completed this expedition, and the first people to try and verify the story, I think it was the Toronto Star or the Globe and Mail. It was actually Canadian paper, and they didn't believe that it was a real story, right? And they, of course, then they found out that there was this film, and then they believed it, and then they published it or whatever. But it goes to show you where we are in the mind now. You guys have both done tons of running, and for Dave to get on a treadmill, how far did you ran 100, and how many? It's a ridiculous distance in 24 hours.
Yeah, so 260 kilometers. Yeah.
260 kilometers in a 24-hour period. That's like driving to Montreal and then halfway back again from Ottawa. And yet you can say that now, and someone could say, okay, that's believable now. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Even though it's still, I mean, that 260K in 24 hours is pretty still hard to wrap your head around. The point is now in the era of social media and everything else, running the Sahara looks different and it feels different now than what it meant then, you know? And we had no idea it was going to turn into this crazy thing that it turned into, but it was the impetus for everything else that I'm doing now in my life. So
Yeah, we got
yeah.
to.
Anyhow, sorry, I didn't mean to ramble on there.
No, that's great.
Please, that's, what's interesting. I spent time in Cairo in 2008 and 2009. After watching the movie just for a work reason, and it was like, this rock, right? Then we went down to Sharm el Sheikh, and I was running one morning, and it was 110 degrees, and people looking at me like, "What's the matter with you?" So I can't even imagine. I've always sort of been interested in the Marathon des Sables because of that sort of inspiration from your movie. But I think that before we get too deep into that, I think one of the things we always really sort of love to hear a little bit is like, it's obvious now what Ray does, but like when you were growing up as a kid, were you like, did you have like, Mallory in your head? Were you dying to be an adventurer? Were you a runner? Like, how did it sort of happen that you end up in the Sahara and then many, many more?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I grew up on a small horse farm in the Ottawa Valley with my brother, and we were not athletes of any stretch of the imagination. I mean, we rode horses, we did all those things, but I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to do other things. I got into in my teens, I got into street racing. I had an old Camaro that was all souped up. I was doing these other I had a completely different life, right? And I one thing led to another, and I ended up being a very unhealthy individual as I grew up. I had a great childhood, like a really good childhood, but amazing parents. But somehow, I mean, you slip through the cracks, or things change in your life, and you end up on this path. You become very unhappy, depressed, unfulfilled. I'm barely getting out of high school. I drop out of community college. Just one failure, one unfinished thing after another, and I get to a point where I'm reaching 30 years of age, and I'm just no longer satisfied with where my life was not going, and I was one of these people, I was one of these people that could, not look themselves in the mirror without feeling a sense of guilt, because you're portraying to everybody, you're the life of the party, right? You're the first one with the most drinks in, but you're just genuinely, that's not who you are. And I was just a very unhappy person. That's where it all started.
Yeah.
It was with that realization that I was no longer going to survive into my 30s living the way I was living.
You were maybe even a bit of an imposter. So when I hear that, I hear the word astronaut, I think about going into the unknown, discovering the unknown. I believe that, we all, when we were children, we all kind of know where we want to go. As we get older, we have all these other, messages and ideas and thoughts and other people whispering in our ear, and you end up going and becoming an accountant. And then, we're generally unhappy. And I don't mean anybody who's listening who's an accountant. I value accountants everywhere. We need you people. But, there are the people who go out and do the expeditions. And when I think of that, I think of astronauts going out into to the unknown. So do you think that's where that kind of started? And maybe
it's a really great observation, Dave. I mean, it's possible. I think, I was always enamored as a young person with, you could use the word outliers before, I think it was before we started recording, the cowboys, that would still in this modern era, were living a life that was for sure the life they wanted to live on their terms, because nobody else knew that they were living that life. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like, hey, I'm a Marlboro man out here riding the range, and this photo is going to appear on Facebook, and everybody's going to get my vibe. It's like, no, you're living out with a bedroll, taking care of cattle in the middle of nowhere for whatever reason that you love to do that, And I think that there was those people, the outliers, but there was also the people, there's pivotal moments or snapshots in life that, you know, things that you remember. Like I remember clear as day, Terry Fox running across Canada, you know, and I never thought I would ever be a runner. No interest really in running or any sports of that matter. But I remember that. I also remember, fast forward, in the mid 90s, I guess it would have been 96, 97, seeing Eco Challenge for the first time and thinking, wow, what are these people doing? And that was right around the time that my brother got into doing all this. My younger brother became a really good mountain biker, climber, Ironman triathlete. He was very good sportsman at all these other new things. And he was so into it that it was changing his life and who he was. And he was becoming confident and all these things that I was enamored by. I thought, geez, you know, I'm watching this Eco Challenge. He's talking about doing this kind of stuff. I mean, maybe this is the answer. And that's the only reason I got into doing the things that we love, is because of him and the impression he gave me of how his life was going into a completely different direction, based on the things that he was doing. That the more he did that he loved, the more everything else in his life changed around him. And I thought, wow, I mean, you know, it was before all the Anthony Robbins stuff where, you know, or maybe it was around the same time, I don't know. But it's like the whole law of attraction, that whole thing. Like I was actually seeing it in real time playing out, that this guy who I've known my entire life is living a style of life that is in pursuit of things he's passionate about. And in sort of an unrelated but related way, all these other things in his life are changing too. They're just falling into place, you know?
So observing that and then going out and doing something about it is a very different thing. I mean, I know of so many people who observe and watch all these great videos on YouTube and on and so forth, and read up these great articles about these people doing incredible things, but then sit back and say, well, that's for somebody else to do. Well, when you went there, when you first had that feeling and thought and idea, did you sign up for a marathon? Did you just go out and go for a run? Did you go, like, what was your first step? Do you feel?
I think bare bones, like right down in the root of it, first 30 years, if you put a bottle of Jack Daniels down, whether it was a Mickey or a 26 or whatever, or a 40, the whole thing was going to be gone, right? Like that's just the way I was, right? So my head was like, always wired that way. So then when I flipped and my brother started showing me these sports and he introduced me to ice climbing. I became an avid ice climber. I didn't start ice climbing. I went with him because I wanted to try it, and it was hard, but there was one or two elements about it that I loved so much. Like it dawned the very first time he took me climbing. I've told this story before. I had no idea what I was getting into. So we're talking about 100-foot, you know, wall of ice, a frozen waterfall, and he's got all the ropes on me and the picks and all that. And it's 30 below. I'm climbing this thing beginning of January 2000, and I'm climbing this thing, barely hanging on. He's top roping, which means the rope goes over the top. And he's got this rig, and he's basically holding on to me so I don't kill myself, right? And I'm sweating so much, and there was so much adrenaline from the fear of being on this ice that it was like terrifying, but I liked it at the same time. Mm-hmm. And when I got to the top of this ice, and he literally was pulling me the last few feet up over this ice, right? I remember, I'll never forget standing on top of that ice and looking down at him and saying to myself, this is what it feels like or must feel like to be a Mount Everest summiter. And it dawned on me in that moment that when you do something amazing in your life, because I had a string of things that did not feel amazing, but when you do something amazing, that it's a very relative thing. And if this is what life's about, like if it's these things that I'm going to get from being out here doing these emotions, this feeling of invincibility is going to come from doing these things, well, I'm going to do more of them. And it just kind of like, instead of I make the joke, the Jack Daniels, you know, it's a head of broccoli and I'm going to eat my way through it, right? So it's like my life changed 180 degrees right away when I started doing these things, and one thing led to another. And this idea, my very first running race. So then 2000 and 2003, ice climbing in the winter, mountain biking. I started racing mountain bikes. I started racing mountain bikes all over the world, 24-hour solos, cross-country racing. And then I went from mountain bike racing and adventure racing into running my very first running race. And it didn't dawn on me that running a 100-miler was not a good idea to start with. I just entered it after reading an article and prepared as best I could. I'm fortunate I got the same engine that my brother does. So, but you know, not only did I finish that first ultra, but I won it, and it taught me to never underestimate myself again, and also to not inhibit myself. Now I've become more careful in planning my expeditions than just say throwing caution to the wind. But at the end of the day, I don't know if I answered your question. I got lost there for a minute.
No.
Oh, no, it's perfect.
That was a beautiful journey. I think that I'd love to throw this concept in here, Ray, into the discussion because, so yeah, I think there's a lot of us who would relate to this, whatever we want to call it, excessive compulsive behavior, whatever we point ourselves at. You know, so it might have been a bottle of Jack Daniels, or it was adventure racing, or we work too much. So that's sort of innate in us, you know. But one of the things that we often don't afford ourselves is the permission to go out and succeed in a way with something new and different and feel that exhilaration. And so we often say, that's not me, you know, and we just sit on the couch and we stay there because we don't see ourselves like that. So you had a role model in your brother that could help you in its own way, sort of create an identification for you. But I'd love to sort of see if you had any sense of that, which is like you were then going to give yourself permission to live the life you wanted, not what everyone else sort of maybe had programmed into you, which wasn't that satisfying. Any sense as to whether you felt that or understood that was going on?
Well, it's a very interesting theory. I mean, I think that I had spent the first 30 years of my life talking myself out of doing things, right? So like I wouldn't do something because I was afraid of what someone would think.
Right.
Or that it for sure was going to end in failure, or, you know, there was no point in even trying, right? Sometimes. So when I started this new journey, and again, it's a compressed time period. So, you know, even saying 2000 to 2003, that's 3 years, it's a long time, right? I started to realize that the cause and effect was a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And what I realized was that I had to make decisions and do things that I felt were right because I had nothing to lose. Yes. I had nothing to lose. So I changed instead of my philosophy being, well, what's the point in even trying? My philosophy became, well, I got nothing to lose. So I would just go and I would try these things. And I wouldn't even, there was no inhibiting factor, like sitting on the couch and not giving myself the permission to go and do the things. I would just kind of like, I wouldn't even go through that process. I would just be like, all right, you know, whatever, let's go. You know, and I would just go and do these things. And ironically, and maybe this is somewhat related to what you're saying. When I finished that first ultra in the Yukon, and it was the Yukon Arctic Ultra, 100-mile event. They have several different events. I ran the 100-mile. When I finished that and I crossed the finish line and they told me I'd won that race, I did not believe them. And I don't say that like, haha, funny, I didn't believe that I won that. I literally thought it was impossible. Like there had to have been a mistake that everybody else dropped out, or I took a wrong turn, or I just could not accept that I was capable of winning something, you know? And so it was a very strange mix of feelings, almost like a lack of acceptance that I was able to do this. But once I did accept it, I instantly had an insatiable appetite to want to go and do it again, to see, could I do this again? Like, was this possible? Was this just an anomaly? Was this just a weird thing that happened, like a fluke? Because what running taught me in that very first race was that I could exceed mental and physical and emotional limits that I thought I had. I know you guys know this part because you've been there, but it's like, you know, if you told me on the start line that I was going to finish this thing, I said, there's no way, let alone win it. But I was there to learn something that I felt others knew that had gone before me. That's the only reason I entered the thing, because I wanted to learn something. So then I started entering these things all over the world. I started doing these races all over the world. Marathon des Sables a couple of times, for example, and all these different races. And I started pushing myself harder. And, you know, some races went really well, some races not so good. But I kept learning stuff. And then I started to think, wow, okay, so running is much more than something that I apparently have a passion for and I'm somewhat good at. It's teaching me things that are relevant to everything else in my life.
Yeah, limitations and ceilings are a funny thing, aren't they, Ray? You know, I find personally, we set them in our lives, not necessarily for anybody else, but more or less for us. Kind of keeps us in our space of being content with what we have and what we know, because we set ourselves out to be either a 4, 5, or 6. But you know, really the outliers in the world are really living life in the 0s and 1s and the 9s and the 10s. And so, but that's a pretty scary place for the vast majority of people. But like you know, I've had very similar experiences where you end up coming out from a race and you go, wow, that was incredible. And I learned a lot getting to that. And if I could do that, what else can I do? And it kind of raises your ceiling. And so do you find now that the ceiling is continually being raised, or do you feel that your bubble is pretty much, you know, I mean, I look at your expeditions and they're spectacular. And I for one scratch my head and go, okay, is there anything bigger than what you're currently doing right now? Is there anything bigger?
You know, that again, you guys ask such good questions. For me, it's and how do I say this without, I don't want it to sound pretentious. It's never been about big. It's always been about a specific thing that I want to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, look, we broke the world record to the South Pole. That wasn't the intention necessarily in the beginning. We went, the three of us, we're hiking our way to the South Pole. We're drinking scotch every night. We're having a good time, 3 buddies. We just happened to be going really fast. It was about something else. It's like any of the deserts that I've crossed, or, you know, granted, the projects that I've left towards the end of my career that I still want to do are the more difficult and most difficult ones that are left, you know. And I think it's just by virtue of an appreciation of the experience level that I need to be able to do the last things that I want to do that in my career that you know, it's taken me this so long to get there. But as far as it's a strange thing, David. It's never been. There's like this homeostasis. Like it's always like level. It's like, yeah, okay, so I did this, and now I'm here, and then I might do this, and it's never like this in my life. It's just kind of like, this is what I do. I love what I do, but it's not. And the growth happens through the lessons that I've learned. I've had a lot of close calls on expeditions. I've had a lot of expeditions go as smoothly as possible. I've had expeditions I couldn't finish. And in every single one, there is knowledge that I take that creates equilibrium across the rest of my life. Does that make any sense?
Oh yeah,
do you know what I mean?
for sure. And I think that I just want to put a pin in this one point for our listeners, which is that let's all remember how Ray started, right? He sounds like more of the normal people than this amazing explorer. You just decided you were going to start to live differently and you were going to find out. I always sort of like, when I set out on my 6th continent, I ran a marathon, 6 continents, 6 days. Everyone asked me about it and I said, just let me go find out. I just want to find out. Will it be hard? Will it work? I don't know, but I got to go find out. So all of us should just go find out. Let's make that the ask of ourselves. Don't know the outcome. It's going to be good because we'll learn something. And I think it's happening over and over to our guests as we go through this, which is that's the pin that they put in it. They said, I want to go find out. And then from there, we can then draw the curve any way we want. We can make it the last time as the first, or we can make it a lifetime of adventure. But let's do that. I think that's a key.
I think it could not be said better. That's exactly bang on.
And
Yeah,
so,
because really, what creates success, right? And what is success? Because sometimes I don't know, Ray, and maybe this is the next question is that, you know, sometimes your greatest success you might not deem as your greatest success, but you might think your greatest failure was your greatest success. Was there an expedition, or was there something that you've done where everybody else is, oh, Ray, I'm so sorry it didn't work out, and you're like, no, 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 I learned so very much from this expedition, or this disaster that happened. And
Oh,
and that was a typical turning point for me in my life. Was there any one of those moments?
there has been so many, but
Yes.
I'll start by saying this, and it's more of a personal one that very few people know about. When we started the running the Sahara expedition, so I would have been 2006. I don't know how old I would have been, 37, 37 or 38 years old. No money. I had nothing. Debt. I was in horrible shape, not horrible shape physically. I mean, I just would, had very little, just married. And I was very concerned about having things and was I going to do? Like, how was I going to, I needed to make a living. We needed to buy a house because we wanted to have kids, and we wanted to do all these things that normal people do. And as we were running across the Sahara, we started to come into these small communities. Most of this isn't in the film, but in Niger and Mali, especially, and even in southern Libya, very, very small communities where people were like just so happy that we were there. Like, I mean, it's just crazy things happen. These three dummies are running through town. Let's go and hang out with these guys. And a town of 100 people would get together, and they would, insist that we stay. We're going to have some food, and just observing. This happened more than once. Amazing meals shared with people, and all the families. You see the kids running around, and everybody's having a good time. And we're so much more similar than we are different. And I'm learning all of this. And as I'm learning, and Mohammed Iksa, who led our expedition, and through interpretation, we would communicate and talk with everybody. And what I was really picking up, the sense and vibe I was picking up, the lesson I was taking, was that the things I thought I needed were the least important in the hierarchy of what would be a fulfilling life. That these people had food, health, clean water, and family. They had those things. And because those things were all good, it was a cause for celebration, right? And it changed my perspective. It was heavy. It was a very heavy situation because it was life-altering perspective change when I came home from that on how I would look at things after that. And I'd be less consumed about the things that I thought were so critical. It's all relative to each of us in our lives, so everybody's got to make their own decisions. But for me personally, it changed the perspective on what I needed to do in my life to be at a place where I could be truly happy, right? And then to more directly answer your question, I've had a couple of expeditions. I mean, Kamchatka was a great one. I attempted to cross the Kamchatka Peninsula in far east Russia. It's a giant chunk of land that looks like Florida. It hangs off the eastern side of Siberia, sort of between Alaska and the Russian mainland. And this was one of those expeditions that I was like, all right, you know what, I'm going to put this one out there a few years. And it's going to take lots of planning, permissions, visas, all kinds of stuff, because I'd been to Russia before on expeditions. I knew it was going to be complicated logistically, very complicated. So 4 years of basic planning to get to this expedition. And the year I didn't do it solo, I did it with an Italian guy named Stefano Gregoretti, just a great adventure. And the year we decided to do this was one of the warmest on record in the region that we were going to go. When we started the expedition, which is a whole other story of how we even got to the western side of Kamchatka, I won't bore you guys with the details, but when we finally got there, literally in the middle of nowhere, it was 50 below, the ocean was frozen, so all the salt water was frozen along the coast, and I thought, okay, we've got this thing. As long as it stays 50 below and the snow's about a foot deep, we're going to cruise, because we planned on using river systems the entire way to get across Kamchatka. If I bore you here at any point, stop me.
No,
so we're on these river systems, and exactly on the route that we had planned. That was going to be triple the distance of the width of Kamchatka, because the rivers do this, right? You're not above the tree line until you hit the mountains. So it's a lot like Canada, essentially. So we get inland, I don't know, maybe, I don't even know, 60, 100 kilometers on foot at this point, not in a straight line, but doing this. And the snow depth goes from a foot to 1.5 meters. And in this central part of Kamchatka, they had an exceptionally warm winter, followed by a freeze and 1.5 meters of snow. So all the rivers that we had been previously skiing on now had about 1 inch of ice, covered in snow, was completely insulated. And even though it's 50 below, 40 below, it's not freezing. So travel on rivers became impossible. So we had to start hauling our sleds through the woods, through the bush, up and down. I mean, dense, crazy bush. It was insane. The snow so deep that we'd have to drop our sleds, which weighed over 100 pounds each, ski forward 3K, come back 3K, pick up the sleds, come forward 3K. So you do 9K to get 3K net. And so we burned through all our food. And by day 19, now realizing that we were going to have to accept a resupply, we came to the first accessible point after crossing a mountain range, thousands of feet up, through 2 avalanche zones. Anyhow, that's, again, another story. We get up to the top of these mountains, day 19, and we meet our photographer, a buddy of mine, John, who had come up the other end of this mountain range on snow machines with these hunters. And he said, listen, you got to talk to these guys when you get down the other side of these mountains. I said, what's going on? He said, you got to talk to these guys. You got to talk. I said, all right. Skied down the other end of these mountains. We're now over 2/3, like 3/4 of the way across Kamchatka. We figure we've dodged so many bullets by this point. Let's just barrel it out to the coast. But as we descend from these mountains, it's getting warmer and warmer. Bottom of the mountains, it's 3 degrees Celsius. Everything, it's February, 3 degrees Celsius. Everything is melting. The ponds are open that we see around us in the mountains. The rivers are flowing. And I had a sinking feeling in my gut that I knew what they were going to tell us. So we get down there and these hunters all get together, and there's a couple of climbers there too that knew the mountains. And they said, listen, bad news, you guys can't move forward anymore. It's over because the rivers are all open along the coast. It's just, you're talking rivers kilometers wide, braids of rivers. And instantly I knew when they were saying this and explaining it to me in broken English, right? I knew the expedition was over. But at the same time, I was also very comfortable with that decision because I knew what we had been through to this point to get to this point in this expedition, given the conditions that we were dealt with that year, that it was already a monumental success personally for the both of us. And that risking others' lives for some narcissistic endeavor to have to get to the other side wasn't worth it. We weren't going to put ego in front of good decisions on an expedition. And there was no way I was going to have somebody have to come up there in a helicopter, risking their lives to pluck us because we were too stubborn and didn't listen to the indigenous hunters of the area. So I turned to Stefano. I said, you know, the expedition's over. This is what it is, dude. And we packed it up, and you know, it took us 2 days to ski out to a point where 2 more days hauling stuff in miserable weather when you know it's over, just to get to a point where we could get picked up by a 6-wheel drive giant truck. So we get back, and I posted on social media this story of what had happened, and you know what we did. And I had so many people, Dave, ask me the exact question. You must have been so disappointed. And I said, you know what? It was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life because I learned that not everything is predictable. I've had a run of amazing expeditions and successes. Every now and then, if you're not cranking it, if you're not putting yourself out there, if you're not testing yourself, then things go perfectly all the time. You gotta have times like this, because with times like this, you have times like this, and that gap between them makes the times like this feel even bigger. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, it is one of the sort of dilemmas that you have all the time, which is, you know, are you going to live to fight another day, or are we going to sort of put it all out there? And there's a judgment that says sometimes not, maybe in that circumstance, when we push a little harder and then we're happy we made it to the end, and other times. So there is a lot of intuition, I think, that comes in at that moment more than anything else. And glad you made that decision, because it seems like, you know, again, telling it in reverse, it probably was really not the simplest thing, even though it was clear. because you can sort of probably go through all of those ideas. Oh, maybe I could go, and here's the way we.
Yeah, well, we did
Right.
the 2 hours of that. We did 2 hours of that where it's more of a exercise in psychology of the moment than it is in anything that we would actually do, right? It's just a
Exactly.
way. But I've been on expeditions, guys. I had one in the two biggest non-completes. That's one, and the other one was an expedition that I finished, but it was broken up in 3 stages across the Canadian Arctic. And in the very first stage, in January or February 2016, I think it was. I can't remember. It was a while ago. I broke through an ice, ice overflow on a river way up in the mountains in the Arctic, and almost died. Quite literally, almost died. Almost got pulled underneath ice and rapids and way down. And I was in this water for 2 minutes.
Oof.
Stefano and I were together on this expedition as well. He couldn't get close to me because everything was collapsing. And when I went in that river, I thought to myself, this is how I'm going to die. I'm never going to see my family again. That was the only thing that came into my mind. And a much longer story, but through struggling and trying to get my snowshoes off, my snowshoe crampon hooked the side of this hole in a really weird angle. And I was able to push myself up onto the edge of the overflow and roll out into the snow. And when that happened, I'll never forget laughing. I was laughing because I survived this moment that everything broke down into increments, very thinkable and measurable increments. And it was like I hit a reset switch in my brain that minutes ago, I was never going to see my family again. Now I'm going to see my family again, but I may lose my feet because my boots, I can't change. I have a down suit, but I don't have any more boots. So I got to wear these boots for the next 2 days until I can get to a point where we can get picked up. So these are going to freeze to my feet. I'm probably going to lose my feet, but I didn't care because I was going to see my family again. Like it priorities, right? Like everything was. And so it was both the most terrifying thing that ever happened, and at the same time, the greatest thing that ever happened to me on an expedition, because it brought even more clarity to the rest of my life and the reasons I was doing things, and to approach things in a much more humble way. I had gotten comfortable and I had made a mistake. Mother Nature will never let you think you got it all figured out. And I took for granted and I assumed when I went out on this ice, because I know the acoustics, that this ice was solid. I assumed, and I didn't. And I went in. That's how it happened, right? And so anyhow, I ended up finishing that expedition. But to make a long story short, and I tell really long stories, obviously, I took a lot from that experience, and it really taught me things that I came home and people were like, oh my God. And I said, yeah, it was rough for sure. I was completely frostbitten. I didn't lose my feet, but all my toes went black, and the skin, and but I survived it, and it made me stronger and wiser for the next expeditions.
That's key. That's key.
You let your guard down. It's and it's humbling. And I hear about that often, about people that have these near death experiences, and the very first thing that they do is laugh. Because they get caught with, then they feel stupid. They're like, oh, shoot, I should have known. I should have. And it sounds like that might have been.
Oh, I was like, I'm alive. Like, I just could not believe that I was alive. I mean, that was, the first thing I can remember like it was yesterday. Like it was like it was like both celebration, giddiness, and a little bit of losing my mind, I was,
Yeah, and those flashbulb moments in our lives, they're created, right? Because your brain is telling you, okay, remember that feeling in that moment specifically, because don't do it again.
Oh, absolutely.
Listen for the acoustics, be intelligent, be smart about it. Your kids need you, your family needs you, everybody needs you. You're alive on this planet. So would you say that since that incident, how many years ago was that?
I think it was 2016 that I did that. I'm not exactly. It's like, let's call it 5 years.
Yeah. So since then, do you are you a little bit more careful? Do you take a lot less risks?
No, I don't take. Because the risk, like in planning that expedition and doing it, I plan it more than my trips to the grocery store. I mean, I plan every step over months, sometimes years of routing and navigation and So I was as prepared as could be. I just took things for granted. And I, you know, instead of being 51% humble, 49% got it figured out, I was 51%, I got it figured out, 49% humble. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was just a little bit out of balance as to how things should be. Now, leaving that expedition, for sure, I continued to take equal risks in different capacities, but I have been on frozen rivers since then where I know the ice is 2 meters thick. Last January on expedition up in the Canadian Arctic, and I'm freaked out though, like absolutely terrified standing on that ice. So that'll take time to go away, but I'm at the same time I'm planning even more, Dave. You know what I mean? I'm even more planning than I was before, and preparing and saying to myself, okay, A, B, C, now let's do D, E, F, you know, everything.
And I guess that's one of the beautiful things about being, you know, in your 30s, 40s, 50s. Because what are you right now? You're 51, right?
51, yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the beautiful things about, you know, when you go on these expeditions, if I were to go on these expeditions when I was 18, 25, you know, you take risks because you're young. And
Yeah.
I think that we're all guilty of making those really big, stupid errors when we're younger. And you know, when you're on an expedition on a frozen creek or a river, you know, you can't make those mistakes. And so, do you think that your age now is maybe an advantage to you in your sport?
Yeah, and I think it is. And I think at the same time, I think something in what you said, I am definitely more cautious with certain things. Like I'm obviously still an avid mountain biker, and that's never changed. It's my passion. It's sort of my roots. So although I train with running, I get out at least once a week on my mountain bike, but I don't ride the triple back, you know, the double black diamond downhills anymore. I just don't. I've broken my ribs enough times. I'm like, no, you know what? I'm going to go down the single black diamond instead, you know? So that aspect, but I think there's an interesting thing in physiology, and it'll be interesting to see with your running as you age, because you have this tremendous base, and that base can really play well for an aging athlete. So from a physical perspective, in some ways I'm stronger and faster and fitter than I was when I was 35, but I think a lot of that is a mental component. Like I am very well versed now in my body after having been in my skin for 51 years, that I know what it feels like to suffer, and I know how far I can push my body to that limit and deal with it because I've been doing it for so long, whereas someone perhaps who's younger has a harder time sort of gauging things. And so you're actually able to extract a little bit more performance out of that. So in preparation for my expeditions, I find things are actually better from that aspect. And of course, you know, the age, you know, the old wisdom age thing. I think that age in my case has taught me more and more through the expeditions to not take things for granted and to remain as humble as possible and not take yourself seriously. At my house, I have 2 daughters, 12 and 9. They're big time trail runners, Nordic skiers, paddlers, they do it all. And their mom's a really great ultra runner. And when you come in our house, there is nothing on the walls, anything. And this is our personal choice. It's the way we're doing things. There's nothing that indicates what I do for a living other than gear laying all over the place, which drives Kathy crazy. But, there's no pictures on walls of expeditions. There's none of that stuff. We have a big filing cabinet. It's all tucked away in the filing cabinet because I want my kids to establish their own identities in the stuff in the adventure that they love. So that also helps me. It's a double sword. The other side of it is that it keeps me humble too. I'm not staring at my face every day on the wall, you know? And for me, it works. Everybody's different, you know? But I think the humility comes with age as well, you know, if that's
It's good though. Yeah. When we can, if we hang out with the right people, we might figure it out a little earlier along the way, which is always a good thing. The one that I wanted to play in front of you a little bit, you know, Alex Honnold, who climbed up El Capitan without a rope. Everyone always said it was very risky. And I thought his characterization was the difference between risk and consequences. So risk is sort of the probability that something happens, and consequence is the significance of what happens. So it might be a high risk being on a slack line, but 6 inches over the ground doesn't matter. You fall off, consequences are low. So do you ever sort of try and figure that out? Like it's a play against probability and the impact of what might happen as you judge sort of each of those circumstances?
Yeah, there are specific projects that I've looked at that I'd like to do that I won't do because the probability or the risk ratio is too high that I would need to be rescued.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't want to put anybody else at risk for the things that I choose to do in my career. So the things I'm doing are still really big projects that do have a tremendous amount of risk. But the risk, is it the risk return ratio? The risk, you know, I'm cool with doing stuff when I'm at risk or my team is at risk or we know what we're doing. I'm not cool with putting others outside of the project or someone other than myself at risk for something that I want to achieve. So the minute it crosses that line, I won't do it.
That's good. That's good. What's an example of a project?
There are Arctic sea ice projects that I would like to do. You know, coastal projects off of, you know, northern Baffin on the sea ice, where the sea ice is just not predictable anymore. The world has changed.
Yeah.
Most of the old sea ice is gone, and now you're left with a refreeze every winter, and that ice can just pull apart in seconds.
Yeah.
You know, and you're in the ocean, right? It doesn't have any elasticity like a lot of the older Arctic Ocean ice. I remember I'm very good friends with a man named Richard Weber. One of these guys that we were talking about before, he's one of the cowboys, right? He's one of these guys that was doing stuff before it was cool, been to the North Pole more times unsupported than maybe anyone in history. I'm not sure if I got that fact right, but he went from Russia over the North Pole, the Russian coast over the North Pole to Canada over the course of 110 days with another Russian guy. And he's been to the North Pole and back unsupported I think it was over 100 days. I mean, just crazy, ridiculous long expeditions. And he tells me the stories of when that, you know, that sea ice was solid, you know, like it was there until June, they're on the ice, you know? And so, anyhow, times have changed.
One of the things that we love digging into a little bit is the idea of suffering and what does that mean? And you're putting yourself in a position where that's sort of part of the game, right? There's going to be some difficulty or, you know, not feeling great. How do you characterize, like, why are you going out there and suffering, you know, through cold or frostbite, or I'm sure the desert heat or some of the other elements of what you experience? How do you feel about that?
It's a really good question because I never think about it. And I don't mean that, you know, in some funny way and facetious way. Like, I'll give you an example. I've done a couple of projects in Death Valley, off-roads, 2011 north to south, completely off-road, and 2019 west to east, completely off-road over the Panamints and Amargosa ranges, through both times crossing the Badwater Basin, you know, and so you're out in the middle of the salt flats. It's 1 billion degrees out there. And I'll never forget the first time in 2011, I went with the same guy on both projects, and we're doing this thing, and I was in misery. And I said, never again. I will never come back to this place ever again. And then a couple of years goes by, and you don't remember any of that. All you remember is like, wow, you know, the stars at night, and I love the smell of those pinyon junipers and that heat and all this stuff about Death Valley. And then in 2019 in July, I'm on the west to east, and I'm in misery, you know, and it's 1 million degrees. What the hell was I thinking? So I forget how bad it can be. So I think that adventure and exploration, it's in every single person. I think what's so incredible, and we've seen it during the COVID pandemic, is that people have an innate sense and capacity to achieve extraordinary things. There's no doubt about that. It exists in every person. And I think there's a little bit of an adventurer or an explorer in every person. It doesn't mean that, you know, they're going to the South Pole or crossing the Arctic or whatever, but they're able to find resilience in life, right? They're able to find a way to get through when they think they can't. Yeah. And so whatever that discomfort is that enables us to be very human, it's a very human thing to
Yeah.
push past limits, right? I mean, this vaccine, 1 year to make a vaccine. Normally it takes, they're still working on some of the vaccines that they've been working on for 10 years. But a bunch of people got together and said, we can do this.
Yeah.
It's like the chlorofluorocarbons, the CFCs or whatever in the, back in the day with the cans, the aerosol cans. Everybody, we got to change this. So to me, when people get together and everybody has that little bit of that explorer in them, you combine all of that together, you can do extraordinary things. So I think that from an individual perspective, I think that inhibition, when push comes to shove, that suffering aspect is less so a physical thing, and it's much more so a mental thing. And you're going to laugh because I've been quoted as saying this because I believe it, that it's 90% mental, the other 10% is all in your head. And I think that everything that we do, like Dave goes and says, I'm going to run 260 kilometers in 24 hours. Okay, you say that right out from the outset. You can't tell me that's not going to hurt. He knows it's going to hurt. There's a deal he's made with himself. He's going to go and do this thing, and it's going to hurt. But it's 24 hours, he says to himself, or however he said it. I know this is going to, but I really want to do this thing. You don't even, it's not an equation. It's not even part of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I find, Ray, that we all have a set of experiences with our own feelings and emotions in that moment, right? Like, I think scientifically, there's really no difference between when we eat chocolate and then we eat a pineapple. They don't really know in your brain where that really triggers and where it untriggers, and the kind of the truth of all that. But yet you have an experience with eating chocolate. You have an experience with eating pineapple. You have an experience with going for a 2-hour run. You have an experience with going and lifting heavy weights. Your experience and your truth is what you make it of all of that. And so, yeah, absolutely. So I like you, Ray, and like you, Joe, I've had many experiences where, setting the Canadian 24-hour record, let's say, 20 hours in, I'll be, thinking about my own experience and be like, okay, I thought it was going to hurt more than this. And so, experiences with suffering and experience with pain and experience with joy and experiencing with love and all those different things, it's different for everyone. And so, but having this idea of this common, oh, hey, running is hard and chocolate is tasty. Well, why? Right? And so you can end up creating your own narrative and having these very different experiences and relationships with these different inputs that end up coming in. And so, yeah, you could have had a very incredible, life-changing experience with suffering, although somebody else would go, wait 1 second, hurting is never, I want to pull back and I want to choose comfort and be secure in my warm apartment my entire life. But that's kind of not living, isn't it? And do you find that going out for these expeditions, do you find that going and experiencing the cold and going and experiencing hunger, going and experiencing fatigue, do you feel that maybe that's a little bit more of a human experience where you might go, wow, this is living life?
Yeah, from a personal level, because I agree in that you said it's relative to each one of us as individuals. What we experience in our lives, the great things, you can't explain to someone. You go and you get off that treadmill, you know exactly what it feels like inside. Now try to tell someone, and you can't quite get the words exactly to replicate the feelings. It's just like the most difficult challenges that we go through in life. You can't compare those difficulties with what someone else is going through because it's a unique situation. So my perspective for me in my life, absolutely. Those things that I do them because I love them. It's not like I go on expeditions that are really hard because I don't like them, right? I accept the entirety of what it will take to see that sun in that angle of that sky when it's 55 degrees Celsius in the Atacama, standing in the middle of the Incan Trail, which has not been stood in for 10,000 years. You know what I mean? Like, it's just to be there, to experience that, there's a cost associated, and it's all these other things, but it's worth it to me. Or to be in the Arctic and, you know, I hold my phone up, and then you know, there's kids in classrooms that are patched in live, and they can look at that. And I'm like, hey guys, it's -50 out. This is what -50 looks like. And there are kids in California watching this thing. And, oh my God, there's snow, you know? So that's all worth it to me, you know?
So
And
let's talk about that, Ray. You know, so you know, that's one of the things, Joe, that we haven't really jumped into is you know, there are these kids in classrooms all over the place that are out following your adventures, rooting for you, and learning a ton. So tell us a little bit your Impossible to Possible mission and a lot of the work that you've been doing through your organization.
yeah, so every one of my expeditions is connected to classrooms and through live websites, and they become sort of learning or experiential learning portals to the area that I'm in. So when I ran across the Gobi Desert, we used that opportunity to tell the story of the Mongolian culture and this thing called the Nadam festival that takes place in Mongolia every year. And I was the thread that tied together all these stories that people were filming that were not anywhere near me on the expedition, because I'm out in the middle of nowhere in these mountains, and then they're out over that way and they're getting stuff. And so we tell these stories, and the adventure becomes, and I got a tracker on me, so the students are following me as I'm running, and it's exciting for them to wake up the next morning and see how far I've gone. And then there's a story to the Impossible to Possible is an extension of what I do. So instead of me doing the expedition, in Impossible to Possible, I take a group of 4 to 5 youth ambassadors, 16 to 21 years of age, and they are selected from a pool of kids that apply, and they go on an expedition to some far off part of the world. It's free, 100% free of charge, and we combine their expedition with a curriculum. So it's a little bit more beefy education, because there's actually teachers and professors and sciencey people that go on the expeditions to help build this stuff. And then they use their expedition to teach a subject like biodiversity in the Amazon, and you'll have thousands of kids on the other end in schools patching through the live website. So the whole thing plays out live, and it's like a week-long learning event. And so everything's free. I'm a volunteer. People have been volunteering on these expeditions for years. It takes a team of people. I think we've done 15 youth expeditions now all over the world. And yeah, we keep on trucking with it. It's something that I'm very passionate about. It's what I love to do. And I love to, we all find our thing, you know, that we're passionate about that. And this is really what I'm passionate about at the end of the day, you know?
I love that. And you know, we role model behavior, and then they will role model behavior, and that's how we make change happen. I'm going to try and connect a couple of points here and see if this works into what you've been up to. So there's this intense curiosity. You know, we talk about this intersection of curiosity and courage. You know, this need to know, and I got to go find out. So that's what Ray is about. I got to see what it's like to be in the Arctic. I got to go find out what the Sahara is like, and you have the courage to go do it. But along the way, there's some things that could get in the way of that, which is that this fear of the unknown, or that the low. So what I've worked on a lot is the idea of trying to redefine the lows into the highs. This idea that what I want to go find out is, what would that feel like? Because the highs are they're sort of self-reinforcing. Our neurotransmitters do a good job. Dopamine does a great job of self-reinforcing a finish line, a success. I mean, we don't realize it, but it's dopamine that's making us do that. And it's deeper to reach inside of us to make the low into the journey and what we're looking for. How does it feel when it's the hardest day? And looking at it and saying, okay, this is what I came to find out. And then see what we do with that. Because if we sort of set up the expectation, then we can go through it. But if it becomes sort of this gauntlet in the way, it's hard to get through it. How does that resonate with you, that the low is the high?
Yeah, you know, because I've become an irritating eternal optimist in this second half of my life, and I can't help it. Like, I catch myself, I say, geez, it could be the worst part, the worst day on an expedition, and there's just this part of me that's, oh, there's no way we're going to get through this. But there's this little spark inside that, well, maybe we will, or maybe let's try this. There's always a let's try, let's do. So there's always like a pilot light burning,
Yeah.
and it just, I just can't help but skew positive.
Mm.
So a buddy of mine that knows me really well, that's in my COVID bubble, who I run with, he said to me the other day, I was talking about Christmas, because the girls and I, we start counting down the days to Christmas because it just happens to be the holiday that we celebrate and that we love. And so we start counting down about 80 days out, right? I mean, that's just how we are. And he's like, dude, what 80 days? He goes, every morning you wake up, it's like Christmas morning. I said, you know what? You're kind of right. Because for the first 30 years of my life, every day I woke up, there was a tinge of gray. There always was something. I started my day with a negative thought. Now I just can't help but not. Now everybody has good days and bad days, but on expeditions, you have good days and bad days. And if anything I've learned on expeditions about those bad days is the good ones come, and when the good ones come, they make the bad ones seem less important, And the analogy I used, I was having a conversation with a friend this morning, and I said, I've had a lot of dark days, and I was able to find my way out of those days. It's like now, if I walk into a room that's pitch black, and I can't see anything, I can still find the light switch because I know how, right? I know how to turn the light on. And expeditions magnify that ability to do that.
Yeah, that's a powerful enabler for all people listening in, right? If they can have in their heart that there is a light switch that they control, right? This isn't about you. Ray doesn't need anyone, right? That's the power of what we're finding in guys like Ray. You've just tapped into it. Your well is tapped very effectively.
But have you guys, both of you guys, get people calling you or emailing you or messaging you, and during COVID especially, they're on the couch, they have never done anything physical, they probably don't own a pair of running shoes, and they've just happened upon a story about you or read something or something, and they reach out to you and they say, listen, I was really inspired by what I saw. I just have this, I may as well start now. I mean, I want to get healthy. I've never ran before. How do you start? What do you do? Because immediately the mind is going to, well, if I can't run 5K, what's the point? And the advice I always give to them is, listen, get off the couch, walk to your front door, put whatever shoes on that you have, put those shoes on, take them off, walk back to the couch and sit there. That's day one. And then day two, walk back to the door, tie those same shoes on, go back outside. Now walk outside, go to the end of your laneway or the end of the stoop if you live in an apartment building, and then come back inside. And then put the shoes back and then go sit on the couch. End of day two. I mean, you really have to start from the smallest steps. But once you do, you can build on those logarithmically. And before you know it, you're walking a kilometer, which is a monumental achievement, right?
And celebrate those wins. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And I think that, during a time like this, during quarantine and COVID, people look to us, the three of us, for strength and resiliency, because, people are struggling. People are really struggling, and they see, doing these exhibitions, what you do, and they think, oh, I could never do that. Well, and maybe I could look at what Ray is doing day to day and hour to hour. And maybe when you string all of those things together, all those reasonable or good choices. And so, no, I think, Ray, you're a light in the world right now, because I think that's where people are looking for grit and resiliency is amongst endurance athletes.
Yeah, and back at you on that. And another thought that comes to my mind, I want to ask you guys if you've noticed this in the things that you've done. But it's those tiny, tiny littlest things that can happen day to day that are fleeting moments, right? Like give you a split second. It puts a smile on your face or makes you happy. And if you're not aware, if you're in this sort of headspace where everything has got that gray, you'll forget about it. Right? You forget. And then that just sort of builds upon itself. I've made this practice. It was something that my wife, I remember teaching our kids when they were little. And it's every night before I go to bed, right before I fall asleep, last thing I do is I name 3 things, no matter how insignificant, that I'm grateful for in the day. Like, I have a thing that one of my daughters made that my toothbrush goes in and my toothpaste goes in, right? And most mornings I'll wake up and I put it in and it tips over and then it wants to fall over into the waste paper basket. And that's how I start my day. And then I got to go fishing around the way. But there's days when that doesn't happen, right? And those are great days, I got to tell you. So later in the 12 hours later, when I'm in bed, I remember that could be one of the moments. So it's identifying those very small things that happen every day that are positive, that we can be appreciative and grateful towards. And then those little things as well, Bill.
Yeah.
Have you ever noticed that? Those
Absolutely. Even our last guest that we had on, John Foley, he's the gratitude guru. He I think his line is, "I'm glad to be here."
Yep.
And really, it's just living in a space of gratitude. Drawing reverence to that every single day. And there's 150 things that happen to you every day. And some of them are not favorable, but I don't know, do you really pick on those and focus on that for the next 3 hours and ruin your lunch?
But it's so much context. And I know we're going a little longer here, but so if you're a football player, right, you get tackled, right? And that's in the game, that's allowed. And you'll be like, the guy tackled me hard, right? If you're walking down the street and someone tackles you, that's not acceptable. So the context matters. And what we forget sometimes is the context of our life is that life is messy. It just is. And if we can sort of accept that we're going to get tackled, then it's not so dramatic. It's like, okay, there are 25 things that are going to happen today that are not perfect, but that's what happens. And so it's not so dramatic. We don't like, oh my God, this is terrible. It's like, yep, I got tackled. And so that context switch in our head is so important. It's what you, Ray and Dave, do in your big events that if Dave is going to run across Canada, run 100 kilometers a day, right?
Forget it.
The record. And there's going to be rainstorms and trees are going to fall down. And
can you imagine the feet? Can you imagine the feet? How sore
exactly. Yeah, I can't wait.
I'm not talking about blisters. I'm not talking about blizzards. I'm talking about.
Remember, Corey? We interviewed Corey, and he talked about he set a record in the ice trail, and we were talking to him. He's like, "Yeah, it went great." And at one point, finally in the podcast, he said, "Yeah, one day I get bit by so many mosquitoes that I couldn't stop running because it was like 100 bites." And he sort of had forgotten it, like it was part of what was going to happen, and he sort of accepted it on the way of the journey. So I feel like, that's the mastery we have to help people sort of achieve, which is that this is what life is. And we need to feel stuff. And it's okay to sit on the couch. We're not going to judge anyone, but it isn't really what life is. Like, that's not the opportunity that we were granted when we were sort of on Earth.
You have one kick at the can. It's not like a video game. It's not like there's a bunch of lives to live. You have one. And if you're lucky, you get 80 years.
Yep.
So the first 30, I said, okay, let's start a game now, and so you got it. It doesn't matter what it is that you do. I have a lot of people think that all my friends are adventure athletes and endurance people. They're not. I have friends that are writers, artists, different things that are completely not associated. But the one thing that they all have in common is they have this desire to find whatever it is in life that they're passionate about and pursue it, at least for a period of their lives, so that you can say when you're checking out, okay, there was that one thing I wanted to do and I did it. Doesn't matter what it is, write a poem, whatever it is,
Love what you do. That's what, if you bring that mindset, people always say, do what you love. That's nice. But why don't we just love what we do? Because that's easier. Because when we figure that out, it doesn't matter. Like, they may intersect, but they don't have to. And it's much easier to succeed. Let's make it easier to succeed. And so, Ray, we could probably talk to you for hours. So you got to tell us sort of like, there's a lot on your list, and you're going to be back on the show. I know I say that a lot, but there are guys like you who are just going to keep exploring. And
No, I'd love to be.
stories.
Yeah.
So tell us what you're chasing tomorrow. What's up next for you?
Well, you know what? I've always got 50 million things on the go. My guiding business, I'm guiding a bunch of clients next year in the Atacama Desert in Siberia. As things start to open up with COVID, I've got a project that I'll potentially do in Northwest Territories this winter, only if it's COVID friendly, and a couple of youth expeditions next year. In winter 22, I'm planning an unsupported crossing north to south or south to north. We're just ironing out those details of Ellesmere in Canadian Arctic. So that'll be a really big project, approximately 30, 35 days unsupported. That's the most immediate on the horizon, but there's other, I'll be back in Death Valley. There's a couple of, things I want to still do, that I'm excited about, but I'm especially excited about our youth expeditions next year as well. So.
Well, you're an inspiration, and most important, I love that you took the first part of the story and you rewrote the second part, and you're getting your money's worth while you're here, and you're a role model for the rest of us. So, hey, look, let's meet out on some ice cap one day and have some fun together.
Or we'll meet out on the road when Dave's doing his thing, and we'll
Absolutely.
just have a couple of cappuccinos or espressos.
I think I'm running really close to your place, aren't I? How far off the Trans-Canada Highway do you live?
Off the Trans. What number would it be on when you go by my place? It would be like 417.
I don't even know. In Quebec, I don't even know what.
Yeah,
the numbers are.
We'll totally take care of you. We'll be. I'm for sure. I'm in Chelsea.
Yeah.
I live in Chelsea,
yeah.
So
it's not far. Yeah.
Okay, well, then for sure I have to know exactly when you're. Well, I'll be back on before then.
Yes.
Because that's still we got some time.
Absolutely.
So we'll. Geez, 100K a day. I still can't even get over that. I know we're supposed to wrap it up here, but the numbers. It doesn't compute.
Yeah, I'll start on day one, and we'll figure it out, and then get up for day two. That's about it.
Oof. That's the way to do it.
Yeah. What else are you gonna do?
Yeah, exactly.
We'll run 10K with him, Ray. We'll put our fair share into it.
Exactly.
Yeah, perfect.
Exactly.
Amazing. Thanks, Ray, very much.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Enjoy the holidays.
Yeah, happy holidays, and
Happy holidays.
I'll talk to you again soon. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.